Right, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to this seminar. I've just got a few jobs to do. The first is to welcome Marcus Westbury to the department. Marcus is a broadcaster, writer, media maker and national director working in Australia from Newcastle, which is about 2 hours drive north.
That's about right, yeah.
In 2008, he founded Bring Newcastle with his own funds and energy. It's a low-budget, not-for-profit DIY urban renewal scheme that has successfully populated, in inverted commas, about 60 now. Yeah, 60 vacant premises in downtown Newcastle on some of the main shopping streets, which had enormous vacancy rates for several years before then, and has sort of harnessed the energies of lots of local producer retailers in the city, to the extent that Newcastle is now listed in the top 10 most visitable places by Lonely Planet.
One of the top 10 cities in the world.
There you go.
Yeah. No one there believes it.
And
fair enough.
Recently, this has been upscaled to Renew Australia,
Yeah.
where the same sort of approach is being tested in other Australian cities. So it's a really interesting case study of bottom-up, I would say planning in inverted commas, activity is probably more accurate. And what we wanted to do today, which is in complete contrast to the 400 or 500 audience in the Resurgence as of last evening, is to have a more reflective and considered discussion about what Marcus has been working on for the last few years, and to see if we can explore the relevance not just for other cities in Australia, but obviously for cities in the UK, particularly Sheffield. So that's what we hope to do today. What we're going to do is Marcus is going to briefly describe the sorts of things he's been doing, and then we'll just move into discussion. And if there's any awkward gaps, I've got a list of questions I can ask. But hopefully, people will jump in. Okay, so Marcus.
Okay. Can I ask who came along last night? About half. Okay. So I usually like talk. Pictures usually tell the story better than I do. So I rely on those a lot. But to give you the sort of the brief summary of Bring Newcastle, we were set up in 2008. We took over the first premises in the city in 2009. We've done 130 projects in 64 empty buildings in Newcastle in the last 5 years. And the model, to sort of backtrack a bit, we're a not-for-profit company set up to be an intermediary between sort of a bit more context about Newcastle. Newcastle is an industrial city. It was home to the largest steelworks in Australia. They closed in 1999, and between the 1980s and mid-90s, 20,000 jobs left in the steelworks alone from Newcastle. Newcastle had an earthquake in 1989, which was the biggest, at that time, the biggest and most expensive natural disaster ever in Australia, and that broke the back of the city. Australia doesn't even have earthquakes. Newcastle just can't catch a break. It's so weird. But that led to a lot of buildings being knocked out of action and big parts of the city being closed off for a long period of time. And then, when I was a student in Newcastle in the early 90s, there was about 40% youth unemployment, 15+% general unemployment. It's a city that's had a whole series of shocks and knocks along the way. So in 2008, when we began the project, there was about 150 empty buildings in the two main streets of Newcastle. And what I'd started to notice was probably looking at it quite differently to the way that a planner or an architect or a designer or political leader looks at it, in which case they tend to look at it from on high and look at it as a, it's sort of, I said last night, it's a sort of the SimCity effect where you're drawing up colour-coded master plans of, in our imaginary future transformation, we're going to put one of these over here and we'll turn that into the creative zone, and one of these will be over here. But the reality is that those plans, as often as not, they don't they don't actually happen. They don't survive the political cycle, or they don't, the money that's needed to make them happen doesn't come, or whatever. And I feel like Newcastle's had so many plans going back to 20, 30, 40 years, elements of which made perfect sense, but for various reasons never happened. A lot of them never happened. And so the city was deferring the future, like it was constantly waiting for some big thing that hadn't happened yet to happen, and then everything was going to get fixed. The way that I started to look at it was a different question. I was my background was I was doing festivals and events and other things, and I knew a lot of people who had creative ideas and projects and initiatives who had things that they wanted to do. And I'd started to notice that at street level, the city was actually really profoundly dysfunctional for their needs. I had an idea myself in 2008. I was going to start a little bar. And I went back to Newcastle after living away for a while to investigate. I don't know if I was serious or not, but I was curious about what would be involved in doing this. And so there's 150 empty shops in the two main streets. I contacted every real estate agent in the city, and no one returned my phone calls. I thought, like, something. Everyone's looking at it from up here and talking about grand things that are supposed to happen later. No one's looking at it from the point of view of why is it dysfunctional from the needs of people who want to do things and create things and make things, of which I was convinced there are a lot of people in Newcastle. So we set up a not-for-profit company called Bring Newcastle, and basically what Bring Newcastle does is we work directly with the owners of empty buildings to borrow them. We lend them to creative projects. The rule with Bring Newcastle is you need to make what you do. So it can be anything from a community art group to a graphic design business or a software publisher, but it needs to be original, local and unique. We find people have those sorts of ideas. We broker access, and we don't just, we do, on one level it's a pop-up or a meanwhile project, but it's important to understand that the context is a lot more than that. It's we don't do things just for short periods of time. We don't do things that are designed to be for 2 weeks and come and go. Our goal is to put something there until something better comes along. We borrow buildings on a rolling 30-day basis. We lend them to people essentially for free. We manage the complexities of things like insurance, of planning permissions and processes like that. We try to take all of the things in the system that make it really hard for people who don't have a lot of capital and resources to do stuff, and we try and make them disappear by putting in place processes to get around them and manage those things. What we've been able to do is convince the owners of 60 buildings, or 60 separate tenancies, so shops or offices, or in some cases entire, multi-storey buildings, to lend them to us so that we in turn can lend them to one of these people who have ideas. We've done 130 projects. 2 of our projects have gone on to buy buildings. 20-something in that range have gone on to become full commercial tenants in the city. But what's happened is that the activity generated by the program has led it's been a huge catalyst for bringing people back to the city. So the area we started working in the city, we had 20 empty shops in what had once been the main high street mall of the city, and no one went there because there was nothing there to go there for. And you had this feedback loop where the businesses, even the successful businesses, were just moving to other parts of town because they didn't want to be there anymore. The retail had all moved to the big suburban shopping centres, and the city centre was very hollow and very dead. What we found is when you started to fill the city with interesting, unique, original things that you can't find anywhere else, people suddenly do start finding a reason to go out of their way to go there. People who lived and worked nearby suddenly found a reason to spend time in the city when they'd avoided it for such a long time. And then the cumulative effect over time has been that the vacancy rate in the centre of Newcastle has dropped, depending on which part of the city you're looking at, by between about 50 and 70%. So, 60 buildings out of those 150 that were once empty are ones that literally we have gone in and cleaned up and fixed up and activated. But many more around those have been come back to life by other people opening their own businesses and their own initiatives, attracted to the dynamic that has been created in the city. I think that's what we do. Is that a good enough introduction? So I'll just stop there. That's this.
Yeah. I'll just ask one question to give people a chance to think. You were trying to upscale the activity to in Australia.
Yeah.
What sort of challenges were you facing there?
So the history of Renew Australia was that the model for Renew Newcastle became fairly well known fairly quickly. Lots of very good positive stories were generated about what was happening, and then we were getting contacted by communities around Australia, but occasionally around the world, at the rate of sort of 2 or 3 a week, and we never thought about what we would do to respond to that. We set up Renew Australia as it's basically a social enterprise. We're a not-for-profit but trading enterprise, and we work as a consultancy and support service to other communities who want to do similar stuff. And a lot of what we've done, which is incredibly boring, but I love talking about it if people are interested in it, is we've worked a lot on things like how tax, legal, accounting, compliance, like all of these very boring processes that are actually critical to making property available work. And Renew Australia is really designed to share those kinds of experience, the experience of that kind of part of our approach with other communities. So, for example, we've set up a national umbrella public liability insurance scheme, so that every other community in the country that wants to do this can get insurance as a sort of service through us, so they don't have to wade their way through, bang my head against that wall for 6 months before I worked out how to solve that problem. Similarly, the kinds of licence agreements that we use to access the properties have been turned into templates so that other communities can use them. Some of the lessons about governance structures and stuff like that are processes that we've now, we've got checklists for risk assessments on buildings so you can work out whether you're wasting your time, whether they're too dangerous to use. And so those sorts of things we've basically through our own trial and error turn those things into systems that are the ones that we now share with other communities. So Renew Australia basically does sort of 3 levels of things. It will simply provide sort of affiliate communities just access to advice. It will go into a community. Sometimes one of the big challenges is getting property owners to be engaged. We'll go into a community and help manage that process. Convince the first few owners to be involved, and then leave the community to run it themselves. And in some cases, particularly in the larger cities in Melbourne and in Sydney, we ourselves are running projects that people working for Renew Australia are working in precincts in those cities as well. So the idea is we've got various scales, and I'm very obsessed with the iterative process. I'm very obsessed with trial and error. I'm very obsessed with the idea that you try multiple strategies to see what works. So part of what Renew Australia is doing is looking at a few different ways that we can support communities to do this stuff.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned that what the business model is for Renew Australia, but how does Renew Newcastle work? You describe actually quite a complicated, sophisticated organisation you built up over some years of trial and error, etc.
Yeah.
Is that running on air?
Yeah, initially. Yeah. It's in the first year or two were just insane. It's literally just the pure insanity of wanting to do something and being stubborn enough to do it. So all of the seed funding came from my credit card. Like, part of the reason why we are the most efficient organisation ever in the world is that we've never had a cent to spend on anything we didn't need to spend a cent on. So we are incredibly, I'm obsessed with efficiency of process. Like, we don't do anything we don't need to do that's not on a car between here and there. Because I live in Melbourne, Newcastle's my hometown, but I wasn't living there when I started the project. I made 40-something return trips to Newcastle before I got paid, which was kind of nuts, but worth it. And then what's happened over time is that the city and the state government have come on board as funding partners, and now Renew Newcastle, we sort of had to, if we waited for the funding, we would still be waiting. But having proved that the example works, the city and the state government funded to the tune of, we're a small organisation basically, we've got the equivalent of about 2 staff, and small operating budget on top of that. And we operate on that basis, and that money is largely funded by the couple of different pockets from the different levels of government in Australia.
So it's not being generated through I don't know what you call them, but your clients almost.
Yeah. No, because this comes up a lot in terms of like what the logic is. Why don't you just charge people more and you could make money out of that? But partially because the whole point of the program is to lower the barrier to entry, right? So if I put a complex requirement on you, some people say, why don't you give people free space and then demand 10% of their profits for the rest of their lives or something, and you make a fortune? Because you don't want to put an onerous burden on someone. The whole point is to take onerous burdens away. The second thing is that we can't make money from the properties because we're actually asking the owners to give us the properties for free. So, in asking the owners to give us the properties for free, if we would then turn around and profit from that, you know, they'll ask the fairly obvious question of why are you getting the money, not us. So we do collect a little bit of money from the projects. They pay a small participation fee, which in pounds is about £10 to £12 a week, something like that, which covers their insurance while they're there and allows us to cover minor maintenance. So things like if glass breaks in windows, we'll put the glass back in, so we don't have to bother the owner. You know, you'd be amazed at how often you're in a locksmith if you've got people losing their keys all the time. Like just stuff, you know, paint, you know, like small things like that that we contribute to the upkeep of the properties, but we deliberately price that at less than the cost we, you know, it's definitely, it's not a profit centre because that would sort of break the trust of the property owners if it was.
You said, Marcus Lewis, you said people were attracted back into the centre of Newcastle because there's a bigger vibrancy and everything else. I just wondered, is that particular group's population, or has that changed over time, that there's a kind of cumulative effect that different groups of the population are now attracted in to use these spaces?
It's one of the key things about our strategy is it's deliberately diverse, right? So there's an assumption, I think, that when you're trying to do sort of creatively revitalisation, it's about hipsters and and there's a bit of that, like it's part of the picture. But we've got milliners in their 60s who make hats, and we've got teenage boys that design skateboard decks, and we've got jewellers. You know, there's a lot of young mums who do craft or design, and artisanal stuff of various kinds. I gauge the success of our program on one level by the diversity of things that we encourage. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that it's important in building the trust of the whole of the community that they don't see it as a cliquey thing. Like, oh, that's just the cool kids. I'd hate that. I mean, I think that would really come back to bite us badly. The second thing is that there's, the basic principle is one of democratising access to the city. So it can't just be about a special group of people. But also, there's resilience in diversity. Like, ultimately, you don't know what's going to work, and so you don't want to put all your eggs into one basket. You don't want to put in 6 shops that all appeal to the same 25-year-old student demographic or, retirees. So literally, a lot of bus trips come in from retirement villages, and teenagers roll up on skateboards, and sometimes they're visiting the same shops. And I think that's, if you can get that, that's good. The ideal mix, the way we sort of curate the program is what you want is a whole range of things that someone will be passionate about. You don't want everything to appeal to everyone. It's not like it's really dangerous to bland it out and try and sort of aim for the sort of middle taste for everything. But you want to be able to say and be confident that if you, whoever you are, go in and browse the range of things that we've seeded in the city, you will find something that you are personally very enthusiastic about. But you won't be enthusiastic. Half of it you also look at and go, I don't get what they're doing. That's fine. That's kind of part of the thing.
I wonder what the knock-on effects have been. You've got people to move back into these previously vacant buildings. What's happened outside of those vacant buildings? Have other investors come in? Have other chains bought up shops? What's been happening outside your own premises?
Yeah, so, I mean, what we've witnessed is a resurgence. I mean, so to understand the historical context here, the area where we mostly worked was the main mall in town. When I was a kid, it was when my grandmother would dress up to go shopping. It had all the high street stores and whatever. They've all now moved out to Westfield, and they're in the big shopping centres in the suburbs. For a long time, the debate had been about how do you get them to come back, or how do you get more of them back in the city, and how do we have the chains that everyone else has. The effect that has largely been seeded by Renew is mostly independent businesses moving into the city. A chain coffee store actually closed down on the strip that we were moving in to be replaced by an independent coffee store, because I think that's what the way the taste demographics have kind of changed a bit. You know, there are people opening small bars and restaurants and serve, you know, things that service the community that's there. There is, you know, there are people just, you know, there's just businesses moving in because there's people around. You know, some are national chains, but I think it's an area that the dynamic has been one of seeding largely independent businesses with some layer of distinctiveness. Even the stuff that we're not doing tends to have that character about it, because that's the character that